Welcome to Riyadea. Riyadea platform. It's a team, a global team, voluntary team from all over the world. It's doctors, master's students, undergrad, and their families too. We started Riyadea 2020 during this pandemic. We started Riyadea doing many Eids and virtual events. And today, we start a new program inviting Professor Casson from Reading University, and he is an economist and academic. He is a professor of economist and academic economist at the University of Reading in England. Currently, he's a director of the Center for Interinstitutional Performance and Economics. He is my current supervisor for my PhD, studying international business and leadership. He was focusing in entrepreneurship and international business theory for more than 50 years. He used to supervise many students virtually during the last 50 years or 40 years. And now, during this pandemic, we're going to discuss with Professor Casson the new way of supervising students from all over the world and virtual meeting. Welcome, Dr. Professor Casson.
Thank you.
Hello. So I have the question for you. Yeah. You've been supervising many students during the last 50 years, face-to-face teaching. So how do you think the advantages and disadvantages of virtual supervision during this pandemic right now? Or have you ever done it before? Thank you.
Well, we have had students who study by distance to some extent, and there are often students who are away for a considerable amount of time carrying out survey work overseas. So some of the students from the Middle East I've supervised have returned to the Middle East to carry out social surveys or to carry out interview programs and so forth. So they've been away often for a couple of terms or so. Actually, I don't think that the mechanics of supervision are much affected by whether it's face-to-face or remote. But I do think that the relationship is very different. I think most supervisors would probably say they prefer very strongly to supervise students who have a physical presence. Several reasons for this. One is research students learn as much off each other as they do from their supervisors. Furthermore, if you know other research students, you also can compare notes about your supervisor and how your supervisor compares with other supervisors. And this gives the student a good feeling for what they're entitled to expect from the supervisor and whether, frankly, they're getting the support they need and deserve. The second thing is research students can function as a community, organising their own doctoral programs, sometimes even organising mini conferences. So they acquire a lot of social skills in that respect. Thirdly, there's the sort of cross-cultural aspect that students having a physical presence in the UK, they get to see how things are done in a different culture. They get to meet students from all sorts of different cultures. Whereas if they're frankly stuck at home or in the office in some remote location, they don't acculturize, they don't adjust so much as possible. And therefore they become more dependent on the supervisor because the supervisor is the only real link they have, which is fine if you've got the world's most wonderful supervisor, but it's not so fine if your supervisor isn't reliable and you've got nothing to judge them against because you don't know any other students who have other supervisors that can give you any sense of how well your supervisor's doing for you. Finally, I mean, supervisions, if they go well, become partnerships and friendships for life. And a good supervisor will recognize that their own students will progress once they've got their doctorates through their academic career. You might be interested to know that about 10 years ago, one of my former doctoral students in economics became my boss, Marina Della Giusta. She was the head of department and I reported to her. But 15 years ago, she'd been my research student. Was it a problem? No, it wasn't at all. Why? Well, because I respect the role of head of department, whoever has it, but also because we knew each other and we liked each other and we worked together. And roles are roles that you play. So with you, Raihan, I play the role of supervisor and you play the role of student. That doesn't stop us having another side to the relationship, which is possibly participating in initiatives like this, where basically you're running the show and I'm in a supporting role. So I do think that it doesn't affect the actual nitty-gritty of the supervision, but it has a big impact on the development of the student.
Very interesting, very interesting. I think the way you co-op with me during this pandemic, and we start to meet up virtual meetings, I think I got the most beneficial because to me, I think I got used to a routine with you. And secondly, we develop a face-to-face, so I have time to record you again and to listen to what I record to you again. And I transcribed as well your interview. So it's make it easier for me. I used to record you before while I was meeting you face to face, if you remember. But then now I think it's documented more, and I got the most beneficial because I think you're down to earth with me and you're helping me at the most. So the second question is.
Well, can I just add, Ryan, before we go on to the second question, you mentioned mentioned routine, that we get into a routine. And I do think that that's terribly important. Most partnerships, whether they're marriages or team working in a business or whatever, they do depend on the ability to anticipate what the other person's going to do and to have confidence that if they say they'll do it, they'll do it. And I think that the way I like to work with research students is to have some formal meetings, typically once a month, where the student presents written work 48 hours in advance, and then I read through it, and then I have a bit of time to think about it, and then we meet up and we discuss it. This doesn't stop the student dropping by or was going off for a coffee or something like that, but it's a kind of fixed point in the calendar, and it provides a check that things are progressing, and it enables us to follow up on issues that are outstanding. And I think that one of the big questions research students need to ask themselves with their supervisors is there a routine of that kind? Because I know from talking to other research students, sometimes they say, well, I've had 3 meetings with my supervisor, and every time my supervisor said, my work's just fine, and just carry on. But I'm beginning to worry that they're just saying that, and that actually they're not really very interested in my work, and therefore there must be something wrong with it. So I do think students do need to realise that they have rights as customers. They're paying fees to their universities, and the supervisors have obligations as employees of the university. And I think one of the obligations on a supervisor is to establish a routine with the student. And if you don't have a decent routine with your supervisor, you really need to try and take the initiative yourself to set one up. If you just stay away and think, oh, thank goodness me, I'm getting on rather badly and my supervisor hasn't contacted me in 6 weeks, but that's fine because I've nothing to show them. It's not fine at all. It means that things are going wrong. So build up a routine, and then the student can play an active part as well as the supervisor in sustaining that routine throughout the 3 years of study.
Very interesting. And the second question is, how many students do you supervise, and how often do you see them?
Well, I've answered that question in part. I see them every month, and in between, as and when required. I think there is an issue about whether academics are entitled to a summer break. I think it's sometimes the case, not obviously this last summer at all, but in other summers, academics do have quite a program of conferences. They want to get away from it all and finish that book that's overdue with the publisher or whatever. And so from that point of view, it's often useful if you have a 2 or 3 month break over the summer while each of you goes away and does something really substantial. I supervise about 5 students at any one time. And I would say this, every student is different, but I don't think that cultural differences as such, say between continental European and British, or British and American, or British and Saudi, I don't think these are anywhere near as important perhaps as people sometimes imagine. I'm never really conscious of the fact that I'm supervising a Saudi student or an Omani student or a German student or whatever. It's the person, and there's far more variety in people, I think, than actually there is in cultures. So some students are very, very respectful of authority, too respectful of authority. So they take everything that I say to them very, very seriously and possibly attach a bit too much significance to it. Other students are on a mission. They think they already know the answer that their research is going to lead. And if you start telling them that maybe that's not the case, and maybe they should be looking for alternative approaches, they kind of feel you're losing confidence in them, or that they're losing confidence in you. So I think every student is different, and that's why it's so important to get to know each of the individual students. What's right for one student isn't necessarily right for another. So I don't actually think there's some kind of general rule book by which you supervise students from particular backgrounds. You have to get to know the student, and then you can work out which of the options is best for them.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. So you don't see the difference between a Saudi student and other cultural, because in the UK, I don't think UK, they have this kind of stereotype and have this mentality of having different countries in SA. So Saudi students are similar to others. It's about personality then.
I think so, because if you take the trouble to get to know people, you realise that it's very difficult to generalise. There's one particular culture, which isn't a Middle Eastern culture at all, and I won't mention it in case anybody from this particular background is listening in. But there are some cultures where there's a very wide diversity of people. Some people are very spontaneous, others are very rule-driven, some are very egalitarian, some are very autocratic. You just can't reliably use, I think, a person's nationality or cultural background or even their religion as a guide to what sort of a person they are. Different things make different people tick. And, you know, so it's really getting to know people, I think, that's the interesting part of supervision. And that's why I like the face-to-face, because it's easier to get to know people when you can actually chat to them informally and feel relaxed and give them a cup of tea if they want it or something like that. You can't easily make a person a cup of tea on a remote communication. So I do favour the face-to-face from the point of view of getting to understand the other person better.
Me too.
I can now see you, by the way. I can now see you, so that's much of an improvement.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, thank you to Dr. Omar for helping us.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Dr. Raihan.
So moving to, thank you for your feedback about the virtual supervision. I think it's very helpful for the new students, especially new students first year, because they find it difficult for them to start their new year PhD without seeing their supervisors. And I think we're going to have more sessions about this later on, inshallah. We have many questions. We'll address it at the end. Before we end this session, I want to talk about your specialist area, because you've been writing about international business theory many years, and you have a new view about it as well. So moving to FDI, you have advised the UK government on attracting and regulating foreign investment, and you have worked with the United Nations Committee on Trade and Development in the role of international subcontracting in developing countries. So how can developing countries attract foreign direct investors in your point of view, and how beneficial is foreign direct investment for developing countries? Professor Casson.
Yeah, okay, my basic answer to that is part of perhaps just a wider point. I don't think people should take anybody's opinion, expert or otherwise, without critically examining it and asking, could I arrive at that opinion myself by just thinking the issue through? Because there's so much noise these days and so much lobbying and so many competing claims from people to understand things that it's very difficult to get misled. And I think a lot of national governments do get misled because they are in fact fed information by lobbyists as if it was actually correct information. So in terms of foreign direct investment, all foreign direct investment means, when you boil it down to something simple, is that a company headquartered in one country operates in another country. Now, if I was to go to the man in the street, pop out to somebody in Reading and ask them, why do you think Amazon has invested in a lot of warehouses in the UK? They probably would think it is slightly strange, somebody just coming up to them and asking them that, but they'd probably say, well, Amazon offers a service that nobody else offers. It's got some sort of unique service. And I suppose the UK is a good market for them because they've got the right sort of customers here, and there's no local firm that's offering a comparable service. Well, you give that to an academic and they can turn it into a massive jargon. They will say that Amazon possesses a firm-specific advantage or an FSA, and then they'll tell you that Britain has a country-specific advantage because it wants to consume this product but hasn't got any local firms that are capable of doing it. And so they'll say, and so we have an explanation of this and all other investments, that firms with FSAs invest in countries with CSAs. Now, the problem with this, to my mind, is it's just blindingly obvious common sense that the man in the street already knows. When it's taught to students at universities, students have no problem in understanding that FSAs and CSAs are crucial in international business, because actually they knew it already. It's just what they already knew expressed to them in some fashionable jargon. And the only value added they get in understanding it is to learn to speak the jargon. And a lot, I'm afraid, of education these days at university level is not about teaching students stuff they don't know. It's by telling them the latest trendy jargon in which to express their ideas. Now, the same thing goes to people who advise the national governments. So you have various sort of mantras that are given. One of them is that if you want American technology or Chinese technology, you have to invite the Americans or the Chinese in, you have to give them a good deal, you have to allow them to build where you don't really let other people build. They're supposed to be able to hire workers that are priority workers for the country, but you let them hire them because they're foreign investors. And the whole idea is you have to be really nice to them. Now, this idea dates back to the 1980s, and it originated in Washington, D.C., where the American government wanted to persuade lots of developing countries to be really nice to American foreign investors. And the excuse for this policy is that the foreign investors come equipped with all this amazing knowledge. And if you invite them to produce in your country, then actually you can pick up this knowledge from them. And therefore you can build your own industries out of inviting these foreign firms to your own country. But there's a lot of evidence that shows that most of these firms have protective measures to stop that happening, because they make their employees sign non-disclosure agreements. Much of the key technology is kept secret at the global headquarters, and only small amounts of it are transferred to the host economy. And basically, the big multinationals can play people off. They'll say, look, we're thinking of coming to Saudi, but we've got a wonderful deal from Oman. Unless you can better Oman, we're going to go there. So they play the countries off against each other to get deals that nobody else can. And as a result, the companies finish up making such great concessions to these companies that the knowledge they get really is nothing compared to the price they're paying in all the incentives they're offering to get the companies to invest there. So, I mean, if you look at what China does, China has industrial espionage where it sends over people to foreign countries to pick up information there and bring it back to China. It's much cheaper than paying a foreign investor to come and invest in China. So there are more than one way of getting technology. Another way is to send students to universities like Reading, where they can pay a student fee and they can get all the information they need from the supervisors.
So to recap, it's looking at the economy in a transparent and critical eye, as far as I got it. And we as a Saudi, we can advise our country by looking to our economy in a critical eye and transparent and equality.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the traditional academic critical thinking way. It is a fact that people recommend triple helix. It is not a fact that they are bound to be right. So I always listen to what other people say, and I always take seriously what other people tell me. But I don't believe it until I've rediscovered it for myself. And it's amazing how many things you can be told by people that sound very convincing when they tell you it. But once they've gone away and you think it through, you begin to think, oh, but they never mentioned this. And oh, but they never talked about that. Because they just spun it the way that they wanted you to hear it. So think it through for yourself before you act on it. That's my advice to governments and to doctoral students too.
Think to it through before?
So think it through before you act on it.
I remember when I came to you first day, I said to you, Professor Casson, I started my PhD today. What should I do? You said to me, think and run. I said, that's it? He said, that's it. You have 1 month to think and run. And then think really, what do you want to do? What do you grow up with? And then come back. So it takes me 6 months thinking and running. I think it's a very interesting answer about the FDI, and I will deliver your feedback surely to the Minister of Investment, Dr. Khalid Al-Faleh. He was the Minister of Health, and he was the Minister of Oil and Gas before that.
Yeah.
So he was, and I think he will be very interested to hear your view as an academic. Professor Casson, I think we end this session, and now we are open for questions. So Dr. Omar, he will read questions that's developed, and we have, after we answer the questions that has been written in the questionnaire, we have Dr. Ahmed Al-Milibari. He's interested to say something to you or to have a say. Secondly, anyone have any question or want to write his question in the questionnaires, you're welcome from the attendee. And if you want to share with us your voice or your video, you're welcome as well. Just raise your hand. So we're going to start with Dr. Omar questions.
Thank you, Dr.
Questions
Raihan.
from the attendee. Dr. Omar, he's a student at Henley Business School. He's studying accounting, third year PhD student. Yeah,
this is my third year. Thank you, Dr. Raihan. And Professor Mark, I'm truly honored and touched for seeing you in this very valuable discussion. So allow me to read out loud the question that I have received from one of our attendees here. She asked me that, Prof. Mark, any tips for PhD students who struggle to concentrate?
Well, I think that my approach to that is to just find something, a manageable project that is absorbing. So if you find it difficult to concentrate, try to work out why the problem, the issue, the task that you're sort of working on is making it difficult for you to concentrate on it. I think you can often make progress with tricky things by trying to break them down into much simpler problems. I think once you get the feeling that you've got some momentum and that you're progressing, then the concentration will return, and to some extent anxiety will dissipate. So if I have a really tricky problem, I don't normally try to just solve that problem. I try to solve some special case of that problem, or some simple version of it. So if you've got a big literature review to do, decide to concentrate on just one type of literature. If you've got a big database to compile, set yourself a task of compiling just part of the database, and then when you've done that, the next bit. So I think concentration will come back once you start feeling you're making progress step by step.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mark. Well, I just have one question, and that was the only question that I have so far.
I have another question coming to my phone, but we will welcome Dr. Ahmed Al-Milibari. He's a researcher, he's a doctor at Nottingham University. He's teaching Arabic linguistics for 20 years at Nottingham University, and he's one of my main partner at the Riyadea. He was volunteering with us since 9 years ago, yes. And he came to visit Reading University, and I think Professor Mark, you met him last year when you came to our National Day. So could you please, Dr. Omar, let Dr.
Sure. Sure. Dr. Ahmed,
and give him the access to the camera as well.
Yep. All right.
And later on, I will read the more questions.
Dr. Ahmed, can you hear me? Okay, I'm gonna move you to panelists.
You have to move him so he can open the camera.
I did that. Yep.
Yes.
He's with us. Yep.
So Dr. Ahmed, he's in Saudi Arabia right now.
Right. I should say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What a fine afternoon. Fridays are special days in this part of the world. And they are special days in the UK as well, because there is a weekend ahead.
Yes.
And it's a very nice treat for this lovely afternoon to see you, Professor, and to see all colleagues, friends, and I think we're scattered all over the world. I could possibly confirm at least we are representative of 2 continents minimum. Now, on a lighter side, I really enjoy listening to you. I enjoy meeting people of such caliber, but I'm going to go on a lighter side and talk about me just a little bit. When I came to the UK, I've noticed in UCV, train spotting is something that we do, and I just, laughed inside out, and I thought, oh my God, it coincides with the release of the film, the publication of the book, when I came to the UK. And it brings great memories to read more about such hobbies when we didn't even have trains in Saudi Arabia at the time. So when I started reading about it, I thought one interesting story goes to the 40s in Nottingham. And the phrase goes, round the houses. Are you familiar with that phrase?
Yes.
And the 1:28 p.m. train that goes from Basford, Bulwell to Nottingham, Victoria. And it's funny when you think about, commuting to King's College when I started in the millennium, working for a number of years, taking the train from Beeston, and sometimes it wasn't the high speed. It was the one that stops at each and every station, so to speak, taking 2.5 hours to get to St. Pancras. What a journey. And when we link that journey to the journey of learning and continuing to learn, to have someone like you right at accessible time all the time for Raihan and the rest of the students you have done, I say keep up the good work, Professor. We are your students, we are your pupils, we learn a lot from people like you. Thank you for giving us the time and the opportunity to rub shoulders with such people of high caliber. That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you very much. Also, I remember I did do some train spotting at Nottingham, Victoria, and I went up the branch line to Pinxton. But of course, sadly, Nottingham, Victoria no longer exists. It's now a shopping centre. And it was one of the most splendid stations in the country, one of the last big one of the last big stations to be built, and was built on very scientific principles with lifts and island platforms and all sorts of novel features. I mean, I think that, having an interest gives you just a perspective on everyday events. You can look at British history from the perspective of economics, from the perspective of transport, politics, the military, whatever. And I do think that it does help having hobbies. I mean, one of the things I regret these days is that so few younger people feel they have the time to pursue hobbies. I think we should bring hobbies back in a big way, particularly during coronavirus, because they do in fact give you something to do while you're stuck at home. If you've got a hobby, then it's something you can work on even if you can't work in the office. So thank you very much for your kind remarks.
You're welcome. And interestingly enough, it reminds me of a saying that goes, find a hobby and get well paid for it. And I think you're a member of the PDFC as well, aren't you? And this is something amazing. Yes, thank you, Professor.
I'm so happy to see all my, most of my friends and colleagues and volunteers in Riyadea here today at the same platform with Professor Mark Casson. I think, do you have something to ask Professor Mark Casson before we end, Dr. Ahmed? We have many questions as well.
No, I'm fine, thanks. No, carry on.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Al-Malibari. Dr. Omar, could you read the new questions, please?
Yeah, I've got another question from another student. He asked me that, as you know, some international students face some challenges with the language, especially in the oral communication. What do you advise them to trigger their fears and communicating their points and discussion to their supervisor?
Yes, absolutely, because there's a solution. And the solution is just to get more practice and more training and more professional support. So I think a lot of people who do have problems, often part of having the problem is the feeling that you're different, that you're exceptional, and that somehow you have to keep it to yourself because it's all rather shameful. But actually, lots of people have lots of problems. About 20% of doctoral students, I would estimate, don't really get along with their supervisors all that well. I would think about 10% of all students probably do have language issues. About 40 or 50% of students probably have problems with aspects of mathematics or statistics where they don't feel very confident, or with using specialized packaged computer programs. And I think, the more that you keep it secret to yourself, or the more you discuss it only with other doctoral students, but not with your supervisor, you're often inflicting a lot of misery on yourself quite unnecessarily, because the supervisor could probably just give you the name of somebody in the university who is the person to see who deals with that issue. If I have a problem in the department, I always go and see Vicky Matthews or Nicola Sanford, and they usually know somebody who knows the answer. And the same is true for doctoral students. If you've got a problem, tell your supervisor, they probably know somebody who knows the answer.
Mm-hmm. Sounds interesting. Thank you very much. And also I have another question, Professor Mark. Okay, this is my first PhD year, and I want to know if I should take my supervisor's permission before asking other professors in the department in their areas of interest. And if, for example, they run relevant classes to my area and want to attend them, and so on. Is it better to take his permission or can ask other professors without his knowledge?
This is just a question of social conduct. If you're on good terms with your supervisor, then of course you would share this information with them. And you might even say, I was thinking of going to hear this, that, or the other, or consult with so-and-so. What do you think? And most supervisors who are reasonably confident about their own abilities would say, yeah, sure, go ahead. So then if they see you chatting, or if this other professor mentions perhaps in conversation that they've been talking to you, then there's no misunderstanding. There's no sense of going behind someone's back. If you don't feel that your supervisor might be very happy about you taking a second opinion, then that is a problem with your supervisor. And I don't think really it's acceptable for supervisors generally to sort of warn people off consulting other people. It's a danger sign that the supervisor themselves is not very confident in doing their job. So I would certainly then go and see the other person, because if your relationship is already that bad, you might as well make contact with other people and get an alternative view. And people should also remember that changing supervisor is quite an easy strategy. It is not divisive, it is not insubordinate. There's a whole hierarchy of people in doctoral studies and in teaching and learning who process issues of this kind on a regular basis. Not everybody hits it off with other people. And sometimes, you know, it's a social mismatch and it just needs to be corrected by a change of personnel. So yes, I mean, do what you think right. If the supervisor agrees, fine. If they don't, then do it anyway.
Yep. Well, I have another question, Doctor. Raihan, could you please just turn off? Yep, thank you. What do supervisors look for in their PhD students? How do PhD students impress their supervisors?
I don't think it's necessary to seek to impress your supervisor. If things go normally and in a healthy way, then what will happen is this. To begin with, the supervisor is clearly the expert, and you, in your first year, are the student. You've got to get through your exams and your upgrade and confirmation, and you're dependent on your supervisor for that support. But as you move through your second year, you get stuck into your research. You've also done a comprehensive literature review. By the end of the second year, you may actually know more about your subject than your supervisor does. It's not a good idea to go to your supervisor and impress them with the fact that you know much more about the subject than they do. But a good supervisor will be pleased that that's true. They'll be pleased that their student is on course to becoming the international expert on the thesis topic of their choice. And so I think that in some respects the relationship should progress so that by the time the student's viva comes along, The student is a budding world authority on the topic of their thesis, and the supervisor is learning from the student about the topic. The point is the supervisor has to accept this. Some supervisors can't accept that the tables have been turned and the roles are reversed, and that now the student is telling the supervisor that they haven't understood the literature properly, whereas only 18 months ago it was the other way around. So I wouldn't set out to impress your supervisor. I would simply say have a healthy relationship with them, which is simply to ask for their support and to show appreciation when required in your first year, and hope that they are happy for you if you graduate in your understanding of the subject. So at the end of the day, you've matured into the kind of person who's worth a PhD and merits getting a job at another university. So impressing people is not, it's a waste of time.
Brilliant, brilliant. All right, I've got another question, Professor Mark. For researchers coming from the market, academic theories world is absolutely a struggle. So what advice would you give us in terms of how to approach theoretical research perspective and a market and make a contribution to it?
Okay, well, I've made one comment indirectly about that at the outset when I said that some theory is the blindingly obvious dressed up in jargon. So I think one of the first things to do with theory is to ask yourself exactly what are the phenomena that this theory is intended to explain. Now, if you come from, you know, a practitioner, you've had a job, you've worked in government or in a big company or whatever, and you can't understand what the academics are talking about, I think you really need to sort of decode what they are actually saying about the kinds of situation that you are familiar with. And then I think you provide a context. You realize that the theory was developed for a particular purpose. So if I can take an example, back again with international business studies, the theory of international business was originally developed in the 1970s because no one in Europe could understand why American firms were so successful at investing in Europe. Everybody said European culture is very different from American culture, but these firms come over from the States, they employ people in our country, and they achieve higher productivity than our own companies do. How can this be? The answer was that these companies brought with them better management practices and better technologies. So they equipped the workers with better advice, better machinery, and better know-how, and transformed workers who were low productivity when managed by British people into high productivity when managed by Americans. And the same thing happened when the Japanese arrived. When the Japanese arrived in Europe, the people said, oh, the Japanese are never going to be able to produce in Europe. European workers are never going to sing company songs and all that sort of stuff. But they did. Why? Because the Japanese engineers went down on the shop floor. They helped the employees with the local problems. So basically, the point is this. The abstract theory translates into real world examples. Once you understand why the theory is as it is, how it was developed and what it's meant to do, if you just regard it as a disembodied set of mumbo jumbo expressed in arcane jargon and turned into obscure mathematical equations using X, Y, and Z when you've no idea what they stand for, go back and ask, why was this theory developed? What's the point of it? What's it trying to explain? And if you do that, you may discover that actually the theory is quite useful. So approach it intuitively. Don't spend ages poring over some boring textbook, reading and rereading, so a couple of sentences you can't understand. Step back and think about, why is this theory important? Why do we need it to begin with? And then I think things will start to fall into place.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mark. And I have
Professor Casson, It's very difficult at the beginning for the first stage as a first year student to think of the theory and the data itself. So thinking about the methodology and linking the theory with the methodology chapter, it's really hectic for the PhD student as a first year. Let's talk about the first stage. Not me, I'm in a third, fourth year right now. So I'm talking about the first early stages, thinking of the theory. It's what is the key thinking, key technique to link the theory of their methodology or their main proposal to reach the confirmation? Because that's what is missing point for the student. It's the confirmation, to get their confirmation right.
Well, look, I'm going to say something which shouldn't be repeated outside of this virtual room.
Yeah.
A lot of the courses that are taught to doctoral students in their first year are simply opportunities for academics to grandstand in front of students. It's considered rather prestigious to deliver courses on doctoral training programs, and in particular methodology is thought to be a very sophisticated and profound subject. As a result, many of the courses given on research methods and methodology are not really of very much value, but they're inflicted on students because the staff need these lectures to put on their workload model and make it look as if they're doing important teaching. Now, students often have a genuine problem because they can't relate the abstractions and philosophical reflections embodied in the research methods and methodology courses to their own research, and they get upset by the fact that they can't relate. Personally, I never studied research methods or methodology. I just got on and did it, and thinking carefully about what I was doing. My view is there is nothing to be gained by comparing quantitative methods with qualitative methods, with mixed methods. There's no point in wasting lots and lots of time discussing endogeneity and instrumental variables and statistical regressions if you don't actually feel that that problem is anything to do with the research you're going to be doing, or whether it's even applicable to the kind of research you plan to do. So I would regard a lot of what is taught in first year as just examination material. The important point is not to learn from it, but just to regurgitate it in an exam to get a pass mark so that you can survive that hurdle on your progress to your PhD. So a lot of supervisors do not like the heavy load of teaching that's inflicted on their first year students. I personally dislike it intensely. And if I could find a way by which I could get exemption for my first year students from all these silly courses that they're forced to do, I would do it. But unfortunately, the powers that be generally offer no easy way out. But I think that in a sense, the issue in a PhD is always that in 3 years, you have to produce a defensible piece of original research. Anything that delays you or distracts you on that really quite tight schedule is a nuisance. And a lot of this stuff on methodology is just a downright nuisance. You only need to understand those aspects of methodology that bear directly on the research that you need to do. So do not, in my view, in a first year, attempt to excel at all the courses that you're taught, because all you need to do is pass them. And so get a pass in the courses you need to pass. And beyond pass level, just concentrate on those aspects of those courses that are directly relevant to your research. That way, I think you can realize that everybody has problems with methodology courses because they are so broad that 90% of the material they cover is of no conceivable relevance to the student's project. So that's my answer. Just keep a sense of proportion. Realize that you have to do it, you have to pass, but that probably much of what you learn won't be of any use.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we have the last question with Dr. Omar. He has his own question.
Yep.
To you, Professor Mark.
Yep. I have one last question, Professor Mark. How to deal with imposter syndrome? How can a student differentiate whether he's really suffering from imposter syndrome or that he's really not doing very well?
What syndrome? Sorry, I didn't.
Imposter syndrome, like doubting in your skills.
I think that one vehicle for assessing whether you are good enough is simply to make presentations. If you're in a department where doctoral students get an opportunity to present to other doctoral students rather than to academic staff, then you can operate in a sympathetic environment where you're talking to your peers about your own research. If you can convince your own peers, doctoral students in the same year as yourself, that what you're doing makes sense, then I think you know that you can't be doing anything all that bad. It all depends a lot, I think, on how your department handles the process of upgrade and confirmation. Some departments treat upgrade and confirmation as a mere formality. And they sort of say, yes, this is a hurdle, but the real thing is, what progress are you making with your doctorate? Other departments take this compliance with the doctoral training program very, very seriously. Now, I happen to know which departments do what, but I'm not going to reveal that information. All I would say is that some departments do take doctoral training programs, in my view, far, far too seriously. They are meant to help the students. They are not meant to be hurdles that students are liable to fail. Therefore, it is easy to become anxious about how you're progressing if you're in a very sort of rigorous climate where failure is always held up to you as a possible outcome. As I say, that's true of some departments, but it's not true of all. So talk to people who you think are sympathetic and who are supportive. And just because there may be some people in a department who are critical of your approach and critical of your work, doesn't necessarily tell you anything about its quality. So really just hang in there and recognize that in some environments, they can be hostile because of the personalities of certain people. But it's not your fault, basically. If you're in that kind of environment, it's not your fault. It's the fault of the people who create that sort of environment in the first place.
And Professor Mark, I have just one question, please. I want to ask this question, if you allow me, Dr. Raihan.
It's from Dr. Umar question.
Yeah,
So Dr. Umar Al-Arabiyat, he has his own question to Professor Casson.
Yep. The question that I want to ask, Professor, as you know that there is a paper route for the PhD and there is a conventional one. So if I didn't get the chance to publish my paper, would that affect my PhD? Or shall I focus on my PhD or focusing on my publications?
I don't think that there is a clear answer to that. It's horses for courses. It's the field you're in. So in some cases, I know very conscientious supervisors will say to their students, you know, I think your work is really good, but there are other people working in this field. They are liable to try to preempt anything by publishing while they're still doctoral students, and they believe that that will help them get a job when they graduate. Because of the lags in publication, even if you get your article accepted, it's unlikely to appear before you actually complete your studies. So in some cases, it's done as a direct service to the student to help them with their career. Sometimes it's done as a service to the supervisor to help the supervisor with their career. That is to say, the supervisor is going to put their name on the paper. The supervisor is possibly coming up for promotion to full professor or something, and they think this will look good on their CV. What you have to ask, I think, is this. If the paper is a self-contained spin-off from what you're doing for your thesis, then there may be some advantage to doing it. So, for example, when I was researching railways that we were talking about earlier, I sometimes come across a particular company that had some particularly interesting foible to it. It's not worth a PhD in itself, but it makes an entertaining 10-page paper. So you can just spin that paper off as a self-contained little bit that's related to the main theme of your research, but which you polish up a bit, make it entertaining, and get it out as a journal article. It does all help in getting a job and advancing your career. But if you're being told, basically, say, to act as your supervisor's research assistant and work on some project that isn't directly feeding into your research, that's another issue entirely. That is taking you away from the track of completion, possibly delaying your completion, and resulting in you have to study another year. So the point is, are you being helped to spin off a clever little angle on your thesis, or are you being pulled away from your thesis to work on some byproduct which is a mainly advantage to somebody else?
All right.
And so it all depends on the circumstances as to whether it's a good idea.
Yeah, I see. It depends on many circumstances. Thank you very much, Professor Mark. And
we have more questions as well. Dr. Omar, will you read the last two questions from Dr. Rana Sabhan?
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Rana Sabhan, she's as well member of Riyadea. She's a doctor at Reading University. And we have as well another question from Yasser Al Qahtani.
Yeah. For the question of Rana Sabhan, we have already answered. Professor Mark have already answered it. Yep, answered.
Okay, then let's ask a question of Yasser Al Qahtani.
There's a question from Yasser Al Qahtani. Said that what are the factors that attract and expel foreign investment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and how do you pave the way for an attractive environment?
Okay, I've been asked a variant of this question before, and the answer I gave caused a degree of consternation, but I do like to be a bit controversial. It's good fun. So I'll make the following observations, simply because you may not have heard it said before. It's not the whole answer to the question, which is quite a complicated question, but I think it puts it into perspective. If you look at patterns of foreign direct investment since about the turn of the millennium, since about 2000, I think you can see a pattern whereby certain parts of the world are developing what you might call regional capitals. So in Europe, for example, there's always been some sort of contest historically between London, Paris, Berlin, Rotterdam, Frankfurt, possibly Rome, as centers of European operations. These are places that companies might go to orchestrate regional supply chains within Europe. And similarly, in North America, there are a variety of cities. It's not just New York, it's Chicago, Minneapolis, San Francisco, LA, a range of cities that people might choose as a center for their operations, for their headquarters. A lot of the value added, we were talking about this earlier, in foreign direct investment often doesn't come from the physical operations, such as the factories and warehouses. It comes from the pool of highly talented and creative people you attract to these regional centers, so in a sense, in the Middle Eastern context, the question is, where is the hub of Middle Eastern supply chain coordination? What's the go-to city? What's the go-to world city for foreign investors in the Middle East? And the conclusion I drew from this is that the Middle Eastern cities are in competition with each other. It's not a matter so much as saying what must we do to attract people to the Middle East. It's a matter of why will they come to us, to competitions in which they're overpaying to attract businesses to their cities and countries. My recommendation is that it's well worth attracting regional headquarters, because they do bring to that city the top people in the company, the people with the knowledge of the region. But simply having a subsidiary plant, which is being coordinated from another city in the same region, that doesn't bring the same degree of knowledge, expertise, or global contact. So in fact, in the Middle East, there's competition, just as there is in Europe, just as there is in North America, between rival urban centers for the highest quality type of foreign direct investment, which is regional coordination. So that's what I would suggest Middle Eastern countries focus on, sharpening their act in terms of turning themselves into attractive centers for knowledge-based investment. And just briefly, what's likely to do that?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have mid-career people. They may want to bring their families with them. So what about children's education? What about hospital care? What about livability? Is the city livable? Is it just a massive traffic jams and hooting cars, or is it a pleasant place with fountains where you can walk to work from your city centre flat or whatever? It's that kind of competition, not the competition of building massive business parks and huge motorways for trucks to drive up and down. It's more the question of where are the most talented people going to feel comfortable working out of in the Middle East. And so I think with that in mind, that would be my main focus for Middle Eastern companies trying to attract investment. Is to establish yourself as a regional hub. Some industries may go to one regional hub, some may go to another. So it's not necessary to be the regional hub that has all the industries, but you could develop.
It's part of the supply chain, you mean?
Well,
you can have part of the whole hub, part of the supply chain, by investing in a human and a highly skilled human.
You don't really want to attract necessarily the lorries and the warehouses or the big manufacturing plants. You want to attract the centers where the decisions are taken, where the accounts are kept, where the planning is done, and IT and that sort of thing. So really, the one approach is to match it to the skills of your local universities. If your local university is really hot on some particular industry or some particular technology, maybe you can attract regional headquarters of firms that use that technology or operate in that industry. So you may well find that firms in certain industries are heading for certain cities. So possibly the way to compete in the Middle East on this city location is to identify your city's specific technological and industrial strengths, and then market those to foreign investors as a place from which Middle Eastern operations in general can be coordinated. You don't just have to go after big factories, warehouses, lorry parks, and other large-scale facilities.
I think we're going for both in the Middle East right now. So thank you, Professor Mark Casson, for all your advices and answers to new students, especially new students today. And thank you for the attendee as well. And everyone asked the questions, and the rest of the questions, I think you can email it to Riyadea, and then we're gonna answer it back in the second sessions. My question myself to you, Professor Mark Casson, what do you see, how can you describe Riyadea activity as an entrepreneurial charity during this year 2020? So we just started Riyadea as a voluntary team and trying to help niche markets by attracting small needs from students and help them to reach their goals through this session today and others by developing aid. So how would you describe Riyadea as an entrepreneurial activity, and how would you define it?
Well, I mean, I think that's a very easy question to answer because it fits extremely well. So entrepreneurs generally spot a gap in the market, which is they identify a problem that is common to a group of people and for which there is no convenient access to a solution. It's pretty clear from the questions we've been getting today that there are problems and people are looking for solutions to them, and your organisation is putting them in touch with people like me. Hopefully they have the questions and I have the answers. So it's making a market. So in effect, it's fulfilling a classic service small business function of putting people in touch with people who have answers to the problems. So it's intermediation, it's entrepreneurs, it's a small business, and it's not for profit. So it's a classic example of entrepreneurial activity. So I don't have any problem in explaining why it's a good thing, what its logic is, or anything like that at all. The only challenge, I think, is going to be managing the growth, because I'm sure you've got a market here, and I'm thinking as you upscale your activities, it could be quite a big market. They're spanning lots of different universities and lots of different countries. So the challenge may well be how you cope with the issue of scaling it up into a much more highly organized, almost mass market operation. At the moment it's small and easily manageable, but it could grow very quickly. So watch out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mark. And I think we're going to end this session today.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for accepting my invitation, and welcome to Riyadea.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you for all the attendees. Do you have
one
word to say?
Well, I was just going to thank all the participants.
Yes, they were really excited. They were really excited to ask you questions from yesterday. Everyone was excited, especially students from Henley Business School. I think now most of the new students, they know you already.
Yeah, okay. Thanks
Thank you so much.
See you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye. So we're going to end today a Riyadea session. It was our first session for attracting foreign direct investors and virtual supervision by Professor Mark Casson, Reading University. He's an economist at the Reading University and Henley Business School. Thank you all. Thanks for all the attendees. Thank you. Goodbye.